Alexander Spesivtsev was born in Siberia on March 1st, 1970. His family gave him the nickname Sasha. He had an older sister named Nadezhda Spesivtsev, and the family resided in a small apartment built in the Soviet era. It was on the 9th floor of 357 Pionsky Prospect at number 53 where they lived, and I refer to this guy under discussion as Sasha from now on to make it easier for myself. See, he was born underweight and actually almost died as a baby, but fortunately or unfortunately for some, he survived. It seems that he experienced a history of health concerns while growing up. In addition to that, he found himself without many friends, perhaps due to his weirdness. Yeah, apparently he was a little odd, or rather shy compared to others, and due to that, he was ridiculed while at school, often being subjected to bullying. Novokuznetsk was an industrial city in Siberia, Russia, plagued by social problems during the 1980s and 90s. The winters were extremely harsh, causing tremendous survival issues for unemployed vagrants. Children who'd run away from home saturated the streets and could be observed begging for money or food. Sadly, most of these runaways back in the 80s and 90s preferred living on the streets as opposed to the comforts of their own homes. I think I need to rephrase that. They preferred living on the streets as opposed to residing in homes where their barbaric parents, particularly their fathers, made life almost unbearable for them. Sasha and his sister Nadezhda were aware of that kind of parent, as their father was described as a drunkard, a violent man who tortured his whole family, while simultaneously frequently cheating on their mother, Lyudmila, his wife, until she finally grew tired of this behaviour and divorced him after 15 years of marriage. After that, he disappeared into thin air, never to be seen again. Hi world, I'm Royston and I'm back with your weekly dose of true crime. Welcome, it's great having you guys here and thanks for stopping by, as I appreciate that. Now if you're intrigued by dark, mysterious true crime, then you're in the right place. So subscribe and turn that bell notification on. Lyudmila, the mother, found work at a local government school and was in charge of the maintenance staff there. However, she was sacked for stealing some plumbing equipment from the school premises. Yet, she managed to secure another job as a legal secretary in a solicitor's office. She was soon joined in the public prosecutor's office by her daughter, Nadezhda, who also ended up being employed there. Now both women were liked, respected and valued, but never associated with their work colleagues. They much preferred sticking together, spending their breaks away from the rest of the firm. And straight after work, they made their way home each day to a little typical Soviet apartment in a block of flats where they lived on the 9th floor, as I've already mentioned. See, it was made up of one bedroom, a living room, a kitchen, plus a little bathroom. Now in that apartment, the daughter slept, it would appear, in the living room, and the young boy, Sasha, well, he slept with his mother until around the age of 12, which is very peculiar if you ask me. In Novokuznetsk, neighbours often supported each other as times were not that favourable. Yet Sasha, his mother and sister were, according to research sources, somewhat reclusive. See, their desire was to be left alone by everyone around them, and as a result, they became an extremely close-knit family. See, Lyudmila was comfortable enough with her children to share anything and everything, including her innermost thoughts, feelings and behaviours, even admitting that she had stolen from work or wherever, and she'd then sell those stolen goods for cash. Something that young Sasha would eventually end up doing as he grew older. Lyudmila was also captivated by the criminal cases she learned about at work and regularly brought such cases home with her. Now they included images of crime scenes, injuries people suffered, as well as pictures of dead bodies. Now for some weird reason, instead of reading children's stories to her young son, she chose to share with him these macabre photographs. See, together, they spent hour after hour pondering these detailed accounts. In fact, they even made a scrapbook containing their favourite images. Now, Sasha preferred reading about these type of criminal case files and would later explain that looking at photographic material of corpses, well, it gave him a peculiar feeling, a feeling that made him feel full of life, or something to that effect. See, this young man, well, he despised other children, perhaps because his mother often expressed her anger when she saw other kids running around healthy and happy. Yet her own son was always suffering with poor health. Now, she often questioned why this was the case. See, her main struggle was why couldn't Sasha live a normal life like these other youngsters? Plus, their neighbours looked down on them, which enraged her even more. Now, maybe Sasha picked up on these feelings coming directly from his mother. In 1988, when Sasha turned 18, his mind had been preoccupied with those crime case images of death for years. Now, when the family sat down for dinner, they no doubt discussed the circumstances of those grotesque pictures. After all, his mother seemed obsessed by them, which in my opinion clearly rubbed off on her vulnerable son. See, maybe his mother's interest made it seem normal to Sasha that torture, serious injuries and death were not really that bad. I mean, I don't know. But what do you guys think? Do you believe that his mother played an integral role in his interest with death? Or would he have developed that way of thinking anyway? Well, let me know in the comments. By the age of 21, his mother and sister decided to move a little closer to their place of work. Now, Ludmila felt that Sasha was self-sufficient enough to live alone in that flat, but she had real doubts about his ability to find and hold down a job. Therefore, she visited him regularly to make sure he was doing okay, bringing food, money, or whatever else he needed to survive. Now, at some point, he got himself a dog, a Rottweiler, which is a pretty big dog, and he took it out for daily walks, and one day he met a young 17-year-old woman named Evgenia. Now, Evgenia was 4 years younger than Spesivtsev. Now, he tried to be romantic with this girl, offering her roses, chocolates, and a passion for writing poems for her. Now, they developed some kind of a relationship, and his mother and sister, well, they were over the moon that he'd found someone. Now, his mother's visits, she'd often normally pop around to him alongside her daughter. Well, they became less frequent because of this. However, the relationship took a turn for the worse between him and his girlfriend, when the couple started arguing over small stuff, leading to Sasha losing control, which caused him to beat his girlfriend up. Now, this girl was familiar with being violated and wasn't prepared to tolerate that kind of behaviour. Therefore, while crying, she ended the relationship there and then. And this upset Sasha deeply, and he found it difficult to restrain himself, so instead, he beat her up even harder. He also concluded he'd kidnap and hold her as a prisoner in his little flat. And within a month, Sasha had frequently, systematically and brutally beat and mocked this girl in every way possible. Now, constant floods of loud music bellowed from the apartment, more than likely designed to camouflage the screams coming from the girl. Now, as time passed by, her parents contacted the police because their daughter hadn't been in contact with them, as she usually would do. Now, they knew she was living with Sasha, but they had no idea where he lived. Now, the police eventually tracked her down at Sasha's place, where they had to kick the door in to gain entry, as he just wouldn't let them in. She was found bedridden with serious health implications, resulting in being rushed to hospital. Now, despite the best efforts of doctors, Evgenia, she couldn't be saved. Officially, she died from sepsis. Her whole body was covered with what can only be described as disgusting wounds, with copious amounts of pus oozing out of them, making it hard for the doctors to determine the actual cause of death. Sasha was charged with the murder of this young woman, and for this, at the age of 21, he was assigned to a special psychiatric hospital where he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And after 3 years there, he was discharged in 1991, as doctors were satisfied with his progress. Now, staff at the hospital made a massive error though, by failing to complete the necessary papers for his discharge, meaning he was out, but paperwork suggested he was still in the psychiatric facility. Now, this blunder proved itself to be terribly fateful later on, as we'll soon see. Once out, it began associating with transients and beggars and fomented a deep-seated hatred of street children, who he viewed as a byproduct of Russia's emerging democracy. He was also particularly embittered by an episode during his commitment at that psychiatric hospital where he spent 3 years. See, while there, he asked another patient to insert a metal ball into his urethra to make him more masculine. Now, this had the opposite effect, causing erectile dysfunction, which left him suffering with genital pains. He was now looking for revenge against the world, it seemed. I mean, remember that big mistake at the psychiatric hospital that staff made when they discharged him, where the hospital database suggested he was still there, receiving treatment, when in actual fact he had been roaming the streets of Novokuznetsk for something like the last couple of years. At least 19 people would die as a result of this clerical blunder. See, Sasha returned to his little flat after his release in 1991, and a large proportion of his time was spent meeting up with beggars or the homeless, offering them drinks or smokes, while sharing his views on democracy and international politics. Also, remember when his mother used to steal from her work premises in order to sell those items for extra money? Well, Sasha was now stealing things like stereo equipment, selling them on the black market for extra cash. So you notice that many youngsters grew up on the streets during this time. Even children who had homes were observed roaming around unattended, because their parents were no doubt busy working. Now, the effect this had on Sasha was pretty scary, as it instilled within him a frightful animosity for capitalism, which he directed at those kids. So if he saw children playing and laughing, it reminded him of his own miserable and unhappy upbringing. And over time, his neighbours would begin to realise that something was seriously wrong regarding this man, because during the summer months, his flat gave off a foul odour. Music was always playing loudly, and this caused a lot of concerns. Now, what they didn't realise was this. See, he'd already picked up a few adults, lured them to his home, where he tortured and killed them. I mean, one of his neighbours even contacted the authorities complaining about the smell and the noise problems. However, the police decided it wasn't really worth their time or attention. I mean, at the time, I guess the country was transitioning from Soviet authority to the new Russia, and perhaps there were some teething problems to iron out. See, Sasha was often seen walking around his neighbourhood with his Rottweiler dog. The city was filled with poverty. Now, it seemed as if this small, unassuming man was not of any interest in a positive way to anyone, apart from his mother and sister. Yet, when he was walking around, he was more than likely looking around for his next victim. I mean, think about it. People knew who he was. He was that weird guy from a dysfunctional family. But they had no idea that he was actually a serial killer, seeking to hide his secrets. By now, though, he had grown tired or perhaps even bored of killing grown-ups and wanted to make a few amendments to his MO. So what did he do? Well, he started to invite children to his flat. Maybe he reflected on his past experiences with being bullied at school by his peers who were all about the same age of his new target group. See, now that he was an adult, he could take revenge and unleash his deep-seated hatred on those unsuspecting youngsters once he got them in that flat of his. And in the spring of 1996, he came across 6 12-year-old boys playing on a construction site. Now, he approached them with a proposal. Firstly, he offered them cigarettes and then stated that if they wanted to make some money, they could do so by doing a job for him. See, he asked them to commit burglary on his behalf, as well, he had a property in mind. Now, they all seemed interested considering they were living in poverty, and the burglary took place at his own flat, but they didn't know that. They didn't know that at all, as he was only using this as a scheme to get them inside it. And once the final boy had entered and closed the door behind him when they walked into that flat, their worst nightmare was now upon them. They all immediately sensed that something, it just wasn't right. one of the boys let out a massive scream. Now whether he saw or smelt something, I'm not sure, but I am convinced that they knew that death, well, it was imminent. Sasha quickly grabbed a knife and stabbed the child who screamed to death. He then turned his attention to the others, who you can imagine were panicking for their lives. Now not one of them escaped that fate, and each child ended up dead in no time. He then placed a piece of cloth from his wardrobe over the 6 corpses after gathering them together in a corner of his bedroom, where they remained for at least 4 days. And after that he moved them to his corridor. And not long after this, his mother Ludmila visited, and rather than screaming her head off with pure shock, horror and despair, instead helped her son to clean the mess up, becoming an accomplice. But what do you guys make of her behaviour? Why did she do what she did? To me it seems that deep down inside of her, she got some kind of a thrill from this. Well, let us know your thoughts on this bizarre situation in the comment section. Amazingly, Sasha went to bed when his mother arrived, and when he woke up the following day, he noticed all signs of the corpses were gone. See, his mother didn't even ask any questions. She simply dismembered those small children, or at least finished off the dismemberment, as Sasha had also involved himself, it seems, in that process. See, she grabbed a couple of buckets and filled them with the decaying remains, and during the night she walked to the school area where she once worked and emptied the buckets into the River Abba, discarding the gruesome contents. See, this woman has spent her whole life fending for her boy Sasha. It seemed that whatever he did, his mother always had his back, even if it included murder. And see, her son, well, he was now preparing himself to go out with the purpose of finding some new victims, now that his flat was free from rotting bodies. Now with that in mind, in part 2 of this 2-part series, I'll talk about an event that happened in September 1996, where his mother, well, she led 3 teenage girls to this man's doorstep. And what happened next is totally disturbing, traumatic, and one of the scariest true crime stories you'll ever hear. To make sure you don't miss out on the weekly uploads, subscribe and turn that bell notification on. And thanks so much for watching.